Tonight, the Assad regime falls. Syria's president reportedly flees as rebels claim to have seized Damascus. Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez from our new home in Parramatta, and this is ABC News. Landowners around the new Western Sydney airport accuse the state government of ripping them off. The Prime Minister declares the arson attack on a synagogue in Melbourne was an act of terrorism. And Australia levels the Test series against India with a resounding 10-wicket win in Adelaide. The Syrian government has fallen in a stunning and sudden end to the 50-year rule of the Assad family. The lightning offensive by jihadist rebels seized President Bashar al-Assad's seat of power, Damascus, just hours ago. Syria's armed opposition has declared that the country is now free of a tyrant, and there are reports President Assad has fled the country. We'll have analysis from the ABC's Global Affairs editor John Lyons shortly, but we begin tonight with our correspondent Eric Torczek on the Syrian border.
Jubilation and celebration in the capital. Fighters alongside Damascus locals dance on top of tanks in the city's main square. Huge crowds gather as news of the regime's demise spreads. Thousands waving and chanting as the rebels declare the city free of a tyrant. In a video statement broadcast on Syrian state television, rebel fighters say President Bashar al-Assad has been overthrown and all detainees in jails have been set free. The collapse of the Syrian government brings to a stunning end the brutal 50-year rule of the Assad family. As rebels moved suburb to suburb in Damascus, symbols and statues of the regime were torn down in triumph. The lightning blitz, led by the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, started just 8 days ago when they stunned government forces and seized Aleppo. As the country's second largest city fell, the Syrian regime called in its allies Russia and Iran. But the opposition forces fought on southward, last night taking control of Homs, which opened the road to Damascus. Assad's seat of power fell just as quickly. The Syrian Army Command has reportedly notified officers that Bashar al-Assad's rule has ended. There are reports that President Assad has fled Damascus by plane and nobody knows where he is. These Syrians here in Turkey, they don't care. They're just happy that he's gone. With the collapse complete, videos emerged of Assad's forces fleeing the country, some into neighbouring Iraq. Once heavily fortified checkpoints, now deserted. Syria's Prime Minister has issued a video statement saying he's ready to extend his hand to the opposition to form a transitional government.
The need for an orderly political transition has never been more urgent, starting with the urgent formation of inclusive and credible transitional arrangements in Syria.
The last day of authoritarian rule and hopefully the end of a bloody 13-year civil war.
Let's bring in Eric Torczek now, who's near the Syrian border in Turkey. Eric, what are you seeing there tonight?
Enormous celebrations, Jeremy. Behind me you can see there's people dancing in the streets. They're singing, they're saying Syria is free. I'm in a town that's full of Syrian refugees very close to the border, and these scenes are being replicated right across Turkey, where there are millions of Syrian refugees, many who haven't seen their homes and families for at least 8 years, since the fall of Aleppo. So the overwhelming feeling is one of relief and joy. There's obviously concern about how stable Syria will be in the future and how will it be governed. But right now, as I've said, they're just joyous scenes and celebrations right across Turkey, and I'm sure inside Syria as well.
And Eric, have we heard yet from the United States or any of Syria's allies?
So the US, the White House says President Joe Biden is monitoring the events closely, described them as extraordinary, and is talking to regional partners. Australia has urged all the parties involved to step back from further violence and move towards a UN-sponsored process, a transitional government. Nobody wants to see the loss of life in Syria increase. There's already been hundreds of thousands of people killed in this civil war. This next phase is obviously critically important, and the great hope is that a change in Syria will be achieved without any further violence.
Eric Torchek reporting. The last 8 days have reshaped the Middle East and toppled one of the region's most ruthless and resilient regimes. And Russia and Iran are also likely to take a hit. With his analysis, here's the ABC's Global Affairs editor, John Lyons.
It's hard to overstate the dramatic shift that's unfolding in Syria tonight. The stunning assault by the rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a dramatic shift in the region's power balance. They struck at the most opportune moment, when the Syrian despot, Assad's allies, were busy elsewhere. The biggest losers, Russia, weakened by its war in Ukraine, Iran, distracted by brinkmanship with Israel, and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. The Assad regime was Russia's major Middle Eastern ally. Putin risks losing his most important naval and air base on Syria's coast, a big blow. In pushing into Ukraine and claiming 20% of the former Soviet republic's territory, Putin may have lost his main conduit to project power to the Middle East. US intelligence agencies are also watching developments with deep concern. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a designated terrorist group. It could now be in charge of Syria's formidable chemical weapons stocks, heralding a new and extremely volatile era.
South Korea's president has survived an impeachment vote. That has outraged tens of thousands of people who've again taken to the streets of Seoul to demand his removal. But Yoon Suk-yeol's own party says his attempt to enact martial law has left his position untenable. East Asia correspondent Kathleen Calderwood reports from Seoul.
South Koreans brought a festival atmosphere to the streets of Seoul. But what happened inside its parliament turned it quickly to disappointment. Every member of the president's People Power Party, bar one, left the Assembly Hall to boycott the vote for Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. Protesters chanted collaborators at the exiting politicians, an accusation of complicity in the president's brief declaration of martial law that for a few hours plunged the capital into chaos.
People Power Party is not a democratic party. People Power Party is a rebellion party, a military rebellion party.
The vote was kept open for 3 hours in the hope enough ruling party members would return. It needed 8 of them to vote in its favour to pass, but only 2 more came back.
The mood here now is angry but also hopeful. In the minutes before the impeachment vote, an opposition lawmaker stood up in the parliament and read out the names of every single ruling party politician who had left the chamber. And they were each echoed by the hundreds of thousands of people watching on here from the streets.
I think the politicians who boycotted the vote are cowards.
The president survived impeachment, but his former defence minister has been arrested for his role in the martial law declaration. Despite the boycott, the ruling party concedes the president's position is untenable.
The People Power Party will pursue an orderly departure of the president in order to minimise confusion for the people.
But if this huge show of public anger is anything to go by, this won't be over until the president is gone. Kathleen Calderwood, ABC News, Seoul.
After days of political pressure, the Prime Minister has declared the firebombing of a Melbourne synagogue an act of terrorism. Local Jewish leaders have welcomed the move, but they say it's not enough to halt the spread of anti-Semitism. They were joined today by hundreds of community members at a vigil near the synagogue calling for government action.
Holocaust survivor Eddie Boaz can't believe he's seeing a firebombed synagogue in suburban Melbourne.
I don't get upset too easily. I got pretty upset about that because I didn't expect that would ever happen in Australia. Biggest problem now, how are you going to stop it?
Enough is enough.
It's a question echoed in the Melbourne Jewish community.
We can't be safe in Australia. Where do they want us to go?
Amid heightened fears and heightened security, hundreds gathered at a vigil for the Jewish community near the Ripponlea synagogue in Melbourne's south.
We're calling upon the government to urgently convene a task force to respond to what is a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country.
Former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg also wants New South Wales-style protest permits in Victoria.
Words are not enough. We need concrete action.
It comes after days of criticism.
I think the Prime Minister is demonstrating particularly weak leadership at the moment at a time when the country needs strong leadership.
The atrocities that occurred at the synagogue in Melbourne clearly were designed to create fear in the community and therefore, from my personal perspective, certainly fulfil that definition of terrorism.
Counter-terrorism teams from Victoria and federal police will meet tomorrow to decide if the attack will officially be classified as terrorism. To the local Jewish community, it's clear.
Absolutely terrorism. It's meant to terrify us.
The firebombing not only sparked fear, but defiance on show in the flowers and messages that now cover the fence in front of the burnt-out building. The community members are vowing to rebuild the synagogue and their community's sense of safety.
In the CBD at the weekly pro-Palestine rally, organisers also condemned the attack.
Is an anti-Semite, is a Nazi, and they're not from here.
As investigations continue, police are yet to make any arrests. Cyan Valance, ABC News, Melbourne.
The state government's been accused of ripping off landowners around the new Western Sydney airport. It's been acquiring private property to build essential infrastructure, but is offering to pay less than half of market value. Nick Dole has this Stateline report.
The new Western Sydney Airport and the surrounding aerotropolis promise to transform southwest Sydney, making some landowners millions in the process. But those whose properties are being bought up by the state government are facing very different fortunes.
The last 2 years have been just absolutely disastrous.
The Lutiger family has lived in Bradfield since 1970. Walter Lutiger now has advanced dementia and requires full-time care. His wife Evelyn died in September after a long battle with cancer. The 6 hectares they own are covered by a so-called enterprise zoning for future industry and could be worth $30 million. Except the government needs significant portions of their property for stormwater infrastructure and for a potential transport corridor.
The private developers that are not interested in these properties for obvious reasons because they're going to be acquired, and compulsorily so, by government.
Last year, their son Scott lodged a hardship application on behalf of his ailing parents, asking Transport for New South Wales to urgently buy the land so they could afford their medical bills. In December, officials said they'd received the valuation report and would try to give him an offer by the end of the week. It never came. Then 2 months later, a promise: an offer will be sent to you by the 29th of February. That didn't arrive either. In March, another assurance that the offer was in the final stages of approval, noting the frustration and stress the process was causing the family.
We've just been walked all over. We had no idea this court case was coming.
Unbeknownst to Scott, Transport for New South Wales was waiting for the outcome of a case known as the Goldmate decision, which changed everything.
The Goldmate decision means the government can simply disregard this land's valuable enterprise zoning and offer a price based on its old rural zoning, which hasn't been in place for years. Through no fault of their own, and simply because the government needs the land, the Lutigers are seeing the value of the family farm plummet.
Transport for New South Wales eventually priced the property at 40% of its market value, which Scott felt was grossly unfair. When he asked the government to buy half the land, he was devastated by the offer the family received.
$468,000 for 7.5 acres. I broke down and cried.
The independent Aerotropolis Commissioner says hundreds of residents will be affected.
This isn't really a humane way for government to act. There's a strong sense that people in Western Sydney are being mistreated by government.
Why should one landowner get less than half what their neighbours are for comparable properties just because the government chooses their property to build infrastructure on. Why is that fair?
The principle that you're raising is a reasonable one. We want to make sure that people are made as whole as possible, whilst at the same time building the infrastructure that the city needs.
An appeal on the Goldmate decision is due back in court on Monday, with implications for other property acquisitions across the state.
If that is not overturned on appeal, I really think that Parliament must look at this. They must look at it. It's manifestly unfair.
I look for sympathy from our leaders, from our parliamentarians, to understand what are they doing to our lives.
Sydney train commuters are being warned to expect significant delays tomorrow because of ongoing industrial action. The Premier says the government's been unable to strike a deal with rail unions and is taking legal action to try to keep all services running. Chris Minns intervened in the dispute last month. A Sydney-wide train strike was called off in the hope of a deal being struck. But he says exhaustive daily negotiations haven't resulted in a breakthrough. The Premier says the rail workers' unions are refusing to call off industrial action planned for this week, so transport officials are seeking a federal court injunction. For the first time, Australia has a detailed national picture of bushfire hazard and the potential impact of climate change on it. The ABC has been given access to the new information being used by national agencies and telcos. Natalie Whiting has this special report.
It's a fairly small burn, but it's fairly complex.
Fighting fire with fire. As the danger period approaches, firefighters on the northern outskirts of Sydney are conducting a hazard reduction burn.
It's a 3.5 hectare burn, which will offer protection to about 100 homes.
It's becoming harder to get these burns done thanks to climate change.
The season is lengthening for us, and also what we're seeing is more extreme fire behaviour.
This map from the CSIRO shows this area already has potential for an incredibly destructive fire. And the data, which uses weather, fuel and terrain information, is now being produced on a national scale.
It has had quite a significant impact already and stands to just be a really firm basis of which we can revolutionise how risk management is achieved across Australia.
Following a royal commission into the horror 2019-2020 Black Summer season, a specialist team at the CSIRO was tasked with producing nationally consistent data.
What we can do as a national science agency is try to build a unified system that simply builds on the best of what states are being able to do and put our perspective on top of that as well.
It'll support a federal response during nationally significant fires. It's also being used to protect telecommunications towers.
I remember you saying the embers can be as small as 2 millimetres.
The CSIRO team analysed more than 7,000 Optus towers, including this one in Victoria's Yarra Ranges. The red dots show areas posing higher risk, and work has now been undertaken to reduce the threat here and at 39 other sites.
We've been able to lessen the probability of those catastrophic losses by 6 times.
The CSIRO data also shows if the fire hazard is projected to increase or decrease with climate change. The red indicates a higher risk under this climate model, which is the case for this area in Tasmania, where Julian de Blanc lives.
All you can do is take the necessary precautions.
Mr de Blanc has taken several precautions, installing cladding outside, double-glazed windows and ember protective blinds. The work's been recognised by the Resilient Building Council, and it could mean he gets a discount in his insurance premiums.
If you're an insurer, well, surely you're going to be wanting to insure properties that are resilient against fire or against flood or whatever the risk is.
Following debate about the use of hazard reduction burns, the Royal Commission asked the CSIRO to develop consistent vegetation classifications and called for better communication about fuel management. A fire raged through this area of the Grampians in February, but Forest Fire Management Victoria says large areas were protected by a mosaic-style prescribed burn.
We know from research that different species will inhabit these different sort of structures of the bush.
With summer upon us, fire services across the country are preparing for the season ahead. At the same time, the Royal Commission is preparing to hand down its final report. It'll happen early next year, and it's expected to show that 33 recommendations have been addressed and 20 others are still underway.
The benefit that Royal Commission has really lies within the ability to understand and pick up those recommendations and honour them and take them forward.
Work on the CSIRO's data is continuing, and so the latest maps won't be available for this fire season. Natalie Whiting, ABC News.
The historic Notre-Dame Cathedral has officially reopened. Against a backdrop of political turmoil, France has welcomed dozens of world leaders, dignitaries and royalty for the elaborate two-day celebration.
5.5 years since it was gutted by fire, France's medieval Notre-Dame Cathedral is officially reopened. Applause rings out for the 160 firefighters who saved the edifice from total destruction.
Tonight, the bells of Notre-Dame ring again. These are the bells that have accompanied our history.
2,000 workers helped in the restoration, which cost $1.1 billion.
This is gratitude to everyone who saved and rebuilt it.
A hymn commenced the religious ceremony, and the cathedral's ancient organ also reawakened. President Emmanuel Macron earlier welcomed dozens of world leaders, dignitaries and royalty to the Élysée Palace, including the US President-elect Donald Trump.
President, I just say it's a great honour for French people to welcome you.
It certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now, and we'll be talking about that. Thank you very much for being here.
The pair met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky before the formalities got underway. Top of the agenda, the war in Ukraine and America's support for Europe.
Donald Trump's presence in Paris is being seen as a diplomatic win for France, as European leaders line up to woo the incoming president, fearful of what a hostile Trump presidency will unleash on defence and security across the continent.
Vive la République. Vive la France.
The celebrations continue tomorrow. The Archbishop of Paris will hold an inaugural mass when the main altar will be consecrated in a special ritual. Catherine Diss, ABC News.
One of Australia's most respected craftsmen is putting the finishing touches on a creation fit for a king. A one-time employee of Buckingham Palace, Jim Frecklington, has kept the dying art of royal carriage making alive for decades. Now, the 74-year-old is getting treatment for health issues while completing one final masterwork.
Far away from Buckingham Palace, in a secret Sydney location, Jim Frecklington is working on the King's new royal carriage. Commissioned for His Majesty's coronation, it wasn't ready in time. But the world's last known royal coach builder has a good excuse. Just like the King himself, Jim is battling cancer.
I've been having chemotherapy quite regularly, and this has affected my health greatly, and it slowed me down.
In the end, King Charles used another one of the Australian's masterworks, the coach he built for Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee.
After I built the last one, Her Majesty told me that the old coach should never be used, should be put away and put in a museum. That's where the idea came from.
The 3-ton carriage has been Jim's labour of love for the past 6 years.
So the art of making these vehicles has been lost. But what I've been able to do, I searched the world for the finest craftspeople I could find.
They include a vehicle body painter, metal spinner and gilder. all of whom have now worked for Jim for decades.
I'm extremely happy. It just looks amazing.
I don't know of anybody else that could produce something of this calibre.
Once the interior is completed, the King's carriage will be carefully packaged, loaded on a jet and delivered to Buckingham Palace, where it will join some of Jim Frecklington's other masterpieces.
In years to come, this will be used for pretty well every coronation for hundreds and hundreds of years.
A master craftsman determined to see his final gem in action before his name passes into history. Brooke Chandler, ABC News.
Some blistering bowling by captain Pat Cummins has guided Australia to victory in the second test against India. Cummins' 5 wickets helped the home side level the 5-test series at 1-1.
India's hopes of setting a defendable target rested on unorthodox keeper Rishabh Pant. Mitch Starc had him worked out early.
Edge taken beautifully by Stephen Smith.
Captain Pat Cummins wasn't too far behind.
Straight up in the air, there'll be another one. Yeah. Cummins gets his fourth.
Impressive all-rounder Nitish Reddy took the fight to the Australians.
High, close on the rope, looks like it's going over the rope.
But he rode his luck once too often.
This time he ramps it straight to the fielder.
Out for 42, Cummins taking his 5th wicket. It was only a matter of time before the innings ended.
It's Travis Head, of course it is. He takes the catch.
Chasing a paltry 19 runs to win, the Australian openers made short work of it.
Caressed, just eased through the covers.
The game done and dusted in the first session.
Kawaja gets it away. The ball races across the Adelaide outfield. It goes to the boundary and it secures a result for Australia.
The series now all squared up.
Last week, we lost a test match and we were apparently the worst test team ever. And this week we finish on day 3 with the series at 1-1.
I knew we were far away from kind of the team we want to be in Perth, but this is back to kind of how we want to play.
A disappointing week for us. We didn't play well enough to win the game, and Australia played better than us.
The third test begins in Brisbane on Saturday. Matthew Smith, ABC News.
Let's take a look at the weather now. And Tom, it has been a sizzling start to summer.
Jeremy, we have sweat through uncomfortable heat and humidity. And here at Parramatta, it has been the warmest start to summer on record. The daily minimum and maximums this month are running at 4 degrees above the long-term average. Now, that's the highest temperatures for the first 8 days of December since the Parramatta Weather Station commenced operation in 1965. For Observatory Hill, the daily minimums and maximums are running at 3 above the long-term average. Not quite a record, but still the warmest start to summer in 45 years. Last night was again muggy. 21 in the city was remarkably the 42nd consecutive night that was warmer than normal. Highs rapidly climbed this morning, top of 29 in the city and 34 in the west. That was as much as 4 degrees above average. A southeasterly change finally arrived from about midday. It brought low cloud and dropped temperatures to the low 20s by the mid-afternoon. Across the state, well, severe storms yesterday brought damage to the Riverina and some heavy rain around the central west. 47 millimetres at Parkes was the town's heaviest rain in 13 months. Minimums were as much as 8 above the average. Many northern towns remained above 20 degrees. Maximums today were up to 10 above average on the north coast in hot westerlies, 35 at Coffs Harbour, their hottest December day in 19 years. On the satellite, only isolated thunderstorms fired up this afternoon over the north of our state. However, this menacing storm did trigger a warning for severe weather, dropped 24 millimetres on Lismore. On the chart tomorrow, well, this high will direct onshore winds and just a few showers onto our coastline. Around the country, a dry start to the week for the southern capitals, but a shower or two ahead for Brisbane. For the northeast tomorrow, it will be a cooler day, but still a high chance of showers and storms for the mid-north coast and the northern rivers, a medium risk for the Ranges and the Hunter. For the southeast, a cooler night, then mostly dry tomorrow for the Ranges and climbing to the mid-20s, partly cloudy on the coast with still a medium chance of showers. To the west, a mixture of sun and cloud, staying dry apart from the slight risk of a shower around the northern slopes, heading for the high 20s in the south and up to the mid-30s for the north. On the waters, winds from 20 to 25 knots and the seas will average 1 to 2 metres. For Sydney, a cooler night, 19 in the city, down to 16 in Campbelltown. Tomorrow should be mostly cloudy with northeasterly winds to 20 kilometres per hour. There's a medium chance of showers for most suburbs, although only light falls. We're heading for 23 in the city and Parramatta and climbing up to 25 degrees in Penrith. Now, the sun will rise tomorrow at 5:36 a.m. and set just before 8 p.m. And ahead, it's back to sunshine on Tuesday, 26 to 32 degrees. Possible shower Wednesday, 26 to 30. Then warm and sunny days for Thursday, Friday, up to 35 in the west. That's ahead of possible showers next weekend. Jeremy.
Tom, thank you. And that's the very latest from the team on ABC News Sunday. Thanks for your company. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
From playful pups to mustering marvels.
We've been through a lot.